Let me paint a picture for you. It is the year 2000. Tom Cruise and Russell Crowe are some of the biggest stars in the movie industry. The World Trade Center is an everlasting monument to capitalist prosperity, and Pluto is still a planet. Now, up to this point, Hollywood is growing as an industry at unseen rates, and as a product of that growth, some truly iconic movies were created in the 90s. Even if you're not a big fan of things like The Matrix or Jurassic Park, which pushed the envelope when it came down to special effects, it would be much harder to dislike classics like Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, or The Lion King. And maybe these aren't your cup of tea, but there is one movie that you undoubtedly love.
Want to hear the most annoying sound in the world? Guys!
Movie studios were not afraid to experiment back then by any stretch of the imagination, and the range of genres that were portrayed on the silver screen was astounding. There was a story for everyone to identify with. However, one type of movies were heavily neglected and were considered a high risk. Films about superheroes simply weren't in fashion yet, and apart from a couple of Batman editions, one of which put an end to the Dark Knight's appearances in cinemas for a very long time, it's really hard to point to a good story from the 90s that features a comic book character. One of the factors that helped maintain the status quo was the market crash that publishers and consumers managed to create. There were news reports of people finding rare issues of old comic books and selling them for hundreds of thousands of dollars. This understandably fueled the speculations that one day anyone could sell their personal collection and retire as long as they had the right issues, such as Superman number 75, which featured the death of Superman himself. Demand went through the roof, so in order to cash in on all the hype, large and small publishers saturated the market and created a huge supply of air for a bubble that was bound to burst eventually. This meant that all the leftover comic books were essentially worthless, and it got so bad that Marvel had to file for bankruptcy and sell the rights to a lot of their characters to movie studios just to stay afloat. Also, back then comic books in general had undergone a tonal shift. Long gone were the days when picture stories were considered just for children. The dark age of comic books was in full swing, and a lot of the stories coming from their pages were at best PG-13. Therefore, movie producers had a hard time greenlighting superhero movies, seeing how most of them were bound to end up with an R rating, which wasn't a smart investment by any stretch of the imagination. Blade, Spawn, The Crow, and This Abomination starring Liam Neeson were some of the more prominent examples of vigilantes fighting against injustice, and all of them were R-rated. Not to mention there was a movie where Shaquille O'Neal gave his best live-action performance by a long shot.
Where'd you get the weapon from?
Oh, look at me, man. I'm shaking like a leaf.
Tell me what I want to know!
There was even a movie called Orgasmo that had this tagline on the poster. Yeah, the 90s were bleak if you're a fan of stories about superheroes. Back to the year 2000. Clinton is still president, Napster is alive and well, Tom Hanks is stuck on an island with a volleyball, and this is the most popular cell phone worldwide. There were two pictures in that year that changed the landscape when it comes to comic book movies. The first is X-Men, which made superheroes interesting again. It received a PG-13 rating, which boosted sales, and last but not least, it was the foundation of the first shared cinematic universe, a formula which we're all too familiar with by now.
Find him! Save Martha!
The second movie I think is equally important and is often neglected by public perception, probably because it isn't your typical superhero story. There aren't flashy superpowers or awesome CG, the stakes aren't particularly high, no one is planning to conquer or destroy the entire world, and the villain could easily die by going down a flight of stairs. And yet, from a narrative standpoint, Unbreakable set a precedent that stories about heroes can be character-driven pieces set in worlds where superpowers exist but are defined by humanity, and not the other way around. The movie managed to shift the perspective about what differentiated normal people from superheroes, or to be more precise, it showed how much we are alike. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is a flashback in which the protagonist, David Dunn, saves his future wife from the wreckage of the car crash they were in. For it to make sense why I love this moment so much, some context is required. You see, David was on the fast track to become a huge football star, but the woman he loved hated the violence in the game and she couldn't possibly allow herself to be with a man who took part in such a brutal activity. So David had to choose. Either chase after his dream or make a sacrifice to be with the one he loved. On that fork in the road, he first donned over the mantle of a hero. Willingly, he gave up a part of himself to make a new life for both of them. It didn't work out as he probably hoped it would, but it was a choice he stuck with for as long as he could. Self-sacrifice is a huge burden that shapes the rest of our lives. Even the most dedicated and courageous people might eventually come to a point when they find themselves looking for something else and feel doubt or regret. But it is much harder to make a story where overcoming these feelings shows the true strength of a character while aliens are invading the planet. The constant requirement to fight for survival can be visually stimulating, but it is also the equivalent of a fast food Happy Meal for the mind.
Hiya, Georgie.
It is not that fighting against earth-shattering evil doesn't take a toll on the protagonist, but superhero movies in general used to be about beating up the bad guy, protecting the girl, bringing someone to justice and saving the day. Before Unbreakable came into the picture, that's what we got. Stories that could be told by pretty much any action movie without losing important narrative beats. Simply put, there wasn't a need for superheroes. Take this scene for example. The son of David believes his father cannot be hurt. He wants that to be true so much that he's willing to risk killing his old man in order to prove it. Neither the character nor the audience know the true extent of David's powers or whether or not he actually has any. It might have all just been a fluke after all. The kid, however, is hell-bent on proving it wasn't because he wants to live in a world where his father can make a difference, where his dad can save people, where the man he looks up to is capable of anything. And in order for such a world to exist, he needs superheroes to be real. David doesn't get shot after all. He manages to defuse the situation and we never get an answer to the question, what if? The thing is, we don't really need an answer. What we need is the sense of vulnerability he displays, the fear and anger in his eyes, the way he manages to take control of the chaos and confusion that is swirling in his son's mind. We need Audrey to stand beside her husband. We need the tension of this episode in their lives. We need this exact moment because it is a conflict that could only exist there, in that world, not so different than ours. We need that sigh of relief at the very end.
I had a bad dream.
It's over now.
I'm not saying that Unbreakable was the sole reason that started the rise of superhero movies, but it did tell a unique story that most likely inspired others to continue that trend, and I sure hope it doesn't die out. Maybe in another video I'll delve deeper in how M. Night Shyamalan created Unbreakable and the following sequels, but until then, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this piece of my mind, please share it. I'd really appreciate that and it would greatly help this channel. Also, please tell me which superhero movie is your favorite and why, as I will be touching on that subject a lot in upcoming projects. And of course, if you would like to see more, please take the time to subscribe, as this year I do plan on making videos a lot more frequently. I promise. Kind of. Bye.